Internet, and welcome to another episode of Weekly Art Tips. I'm your host, Ando, and today we're going to be doing a technique video, but not one like we've done in the past. This one is not going to be a digital art tutorial. We're going to be working with our own two hands in the real world. We're going to be making our very own hand-bound sketchbooks. Perhaps you are running out of pages in your old sketchbook and are in the market for a new one. Why not make your own? You can decide exactly what type of style, what kind of cover, and what type of thickness you want. This is not going to be the cheapest option out there. There are much cheaper sketchbooks you can buy, but if you are more particular about what kind of books you want to use, this is going to be a nice option for you. So the three different bindings we're going to be making are the section sewn, the long stitch, and the Japanese stab binding. So, and also a quick side note about these books is I am using just plain old printer paper for the insides of my books. I would not recommend doing that if you're going to be using it as a sketchbook. So if you're going to be printing just like a printed typed book, then it's fine. But if you're going to be doing something that you need sturdier paper for, I would recommend getting a nicer type of paper. For example, using French paper. I'll leave a link in the description. That stuff is amazing. I love it. So, or if you have a special type of paper that you prefer to use, you can also just make that as well.
So I had originally planned to make this all one video, but seeing as it's going to be an incredibly long video if I do that, I've decided to separate it up into 3 different videos. So each video is going to be a different type of book binding. And I don't know, maybe in the future I might find a couple of other book bindings that you would be interested, and I'll show those to you as well.
Without further ado, let's take a look at our lovely book. So the first book we're going to be working with is going to be the section sewn book. So here's a nice peek at that. What's really great about this sketchbook is no matter where you are in the book, it can lie pretty darn flat. So that's great if you like to work across 2 pages. I definitely recommend this one. First off, we're going to fold our paper. So I'm just going to fold all of my papers in half, because it is the easiest to do with printer paper, but if you use larger sheets, you can also quarter it. Make sure that you fold it pretty sharply. I'm using a bone folder instead of just my thumb, because after a while it can hurt your thumb. I recommend getting a bone folder, or just using like a stiff piece of plastic to just kind of fold it out. And you're going to stack about 5 or 6 would be a good number for your signatures. Your signatures are just the number of pages in each section, and then you add a whole bunch together. That's what's going to allow your book to open at pretty much any angle. So we're going to be using a guide for all of the punctures that we're going to be putting in our signatures. This is going to have 6 holes, 1 on the far ends, and then 2 groups of 2 that are closer together in the middle. I would recommend cutting down the cardboard so it is the same length as your paper, and then just kind of line it up with the middle of your fold in your signature, and take a push pin or some other type of sharp, like a pin type object, and poke all the way through each of the holes in your guide. So after I got all 5 of my signatures punctured and ready to go, I bring out my linen thread. You can get bookbinding thread or just wax coated thread at the craft store. Make sure that you roll yourself out a pretty good amount of thread, and then if it is an unwaxed piece of thread, I would definitely recommend putting some wax on it. I just used a candle, so just make sure that you get a good coating on all of it. That will make it harder for your thread to fall off, and it will also make it harder for your thread to get tangled. So just tie that to the end of the needle and you're ready to start sewing. So for the first stitch that you're going to make, you're going to start at the farthest end of your first signature. So you're not going to be going from the inside, you're going to be going from the outside. So just poke it all the way through and then pull it across to the next piercing that you put in your signature. And before you get to the end of your thread, make sure to leave just a tail so you can tie that off. So pull it all the way through your second piercing, and then Just continue up the line, don't miss any of your piercings, and you're going to end up having 2 larger stitches on the inside and then 2 smaller stitches on the outside of your signature. After you get to the end, you're going to start sewing in your second signature. So start from the far end again, and then go all the way through the inside and onto the outside. But instead of continuing up the line, you're going to take your needle, you're going to loop it through the short stitch on the first signature you sewn, and then continue sewing it into the second stitch. So that way it ends up twisting the 2 smaller stitches on the outside together. So that's going to keep your book a lot closer together. So make sure that you keep all of your stitching really tight. If it makes it too loose, then your book's going to be wobbly and it's not going to be as solid as you'd like. So that would be not a very, very fun time whenever you're trying to sketch something and your pages keep shifting around. So do that again with the second smaller stitches, and then once you get to the end of your second signature, you're going to take your needle and then tie it with the extra thread that you kept on your first signature. Then you're going to do the same thing that you did with the second signature on the third signature. Make sure to loop those smaller stitches together. And then once you get to the end of that signature, you're going to notice that the 2 sides on the end are going to not be connected, and that's because they haven't been tied off. So what you're going to do is you're going to take your needle, you're going to loop it between the first and second signature and pull that really tight, and then continue on with your fourth signature. So continue this process until you have completed all of the signatures. I only used 5, like I said, for this sketchbook. And I wouldn't recommend doing quite as few as I've done if you're going to be making a larger sketchbook, but it's really up to you how many you want to include. So now that we have completely finished our signature, we're going to just flip through it real quick, and it looks pretty nice. So let's put that aside. Now next we're going to be taking 2 pieces of blue paper. I just went to the craft store and got some scrapbooking paper. Anything similar to that would be fine, just really up to you. I just chose regular blue because I thought it looked pretty with the design that I wanted to do on the front of my book. So like you did with the original signatures, go ahead and fold that flat. You're going to do that for both of these sheets and then just put them aside. Next, you're going to trim them down so they are roughly the same size as your signatures. Doesn't really matter if it's going to be super straight or perfect looking at this point because we're going to end up trimming down the book in the end. So to attach these blue sheets, we're going to end up adding a little bit of glue to just kind of the end of each side of our signatures, so that way it sticks there pretty nice. I use Uhu or Yoo-hoo, whatever it is pronounced. I think that is the best glue stick that I've ever used. I definitely recommend it. If you have a preferred glue stick brand, it should be fine, just as long as it is archival quality. So after getting the blue sheets added, we're going to take a smaller piece and we're going to trim it down so it is the same height as our signature. And we're going to trim that and trim that again. And then we're going to add some glue stick to it and wrap it around the back of our book. So that's going to be a glue binding just to kind of keep all of the pages together and make it all nice and neat. So after gluing that up, we're going to just kind of smooth it out just so that the glue really adheres to it and it's not lumpy. Alright, so let's just flip through that real quick. Looks good. Next, we're going to be taking a piece of cardboard that we're going to be using as the 2 sides of our cover, and we're just going to draw a little line here so we can keep track of how big the book is going to be. And we're going to take a ruler and go and trim down the sides using a box cutter or an X-Acto knife. Make sure that you just do a whole bunch of shallow cuts because you don't want to put too much pressure on it. If you have access to something like a book guillotine, it's going to get you the cleanest cuts, but if you do not have access to it, like I do not have access to it, this is probably going to be the easiest way of cutting down all of your pages and make them look nice and neat. So just keep on sawing at it every page at a time, and you will eventually get to the bottom of your stack. Make sure that your blade is sharp, or else this will mangle your paper. Once you have all of your pages trimmed down and it is the correct size, we're going to put that aside just for a few moments. So now I'm going to make the cover for our book. So I grabbed a roll of regular wrapping paper. You can use wrapping paper or print out anything. I would not recommend using a very thick paper for it. We're going to be taking our cardboard cover parts and we're going to just kind of lay it out where we want it and trim down the wrapping paper so that it is roughly a workable size for this project. Next, we're going to add adhesive. I am personally using Scotch brand mounting adhesive. It comes in a giant roll. I really like using this kind of adhesive for bookbinding because it is much less work than doing a whole bunch of glue, but it is a bit on the pricey side. So if you do not have access to that, you could use glue sticks, PVA bookbinding glue, which I'll put a link to, or just any type of archival quality glue that you can add with a brush. So anytime I use my little roll, just assume that you can use your other choice of adhesive. We're going to take a little bit of this adhesive roll and we're going to lay it down and make sure that we take the little squeegee that's included and put a lot of pressure on there to keep all of the adhesive on the paper instead of it sticking to the paper roll that's included. So after we do that, we just put that aside for a few moments. And next we're going to bring out our book cloth. Book cloth is going to be not like any type of normal cloth, so I do not recommend just going into your sewing room and grabbing a piece of fabric. I would recommend using actual book cloth. It is a cloth that has a paper backing to it, so it's a very specific type of cloth. So I have a couple pieces here that already have adhesive added to the back, so I'll just put that aside. We're going to cut our little wrapping paper cover in half, make that nice and neat. So we're going to grab a little piece of scrap cardboard and we're going to trim it down so that will be the same thickness as the back of the book, so that's going to keep our binding nice and flat. So after you cut out the back for your book, you're going to make sure that it is the same width as your binding, and then you're going to go grab a piece of book cloth. So make sure it is a little taller on each side than the piece of cardboard that you cut. You're going to place that right in the middle and then fold the tops and bottoms over. After that, you're going to kind of bend it a little bit so that way it has a bit more give when you add it to the back of your book eventually. So just put that aside and then take two other pieces of book cloth, trim those down nice and skinny, and add adhesive to those and put those around the ends of each of your pieces of cover cardboard. After you do that, line up your cardboard and your book insides and place that on top of the binding that you created earlier with the cardboard in it. Make sure to flatten it out really nicely, and then you can remove the insides and press that down with your bone folder and it will look just like this. Now go grab those pieces of wrapping paper or whatever design that you wanted for the front of your book. You're going to take the adhesive roll backing off or just add adhesive to begin with, and you're going to lay that down on each side of your book cover. So after you find the correct placement on the front, flip it over to the back and then cut off two triangular parts on the end of the sheets. So that way it will fold a lot nicer. So you're going to start on the top and the bottom, and you're going to fold those in, make sure it's nice and flat. Before you fold the final edge in, you're going to take your bone folder and kind of pat down the paper so that way it doesn't create sharp edges when you fold that third and final piece up. After that, fold it up and it's going to look just like this. So repeat the process on the other side and you'll have yourself a completely decorated cover. Now we get to the part where we add the inside of the book to the cover. So we're going to put a little bit more adhesive on either side of the blue paper that we used as our inside cover. So you're going to line the inside of your book up with the covers, make sure that it's nice and securely sealed, and then voila, you have finished a section sewn book. And you're going to notice that sometimes when you have finished the book, the cover is going to kind of stick up at an odd angle. That's normal. What I would recommend doing to keep that from happening is to just kind of put it between two heavy books.
So that pretty much wraps it up for our very first book binding. Join us next week where we'll be going over our second book binding, which is long stitch binding. So I hope to see you guys then, but in the meantime, feel free to go to our DeviantArt group page, Weekly Art Tips, and check us out. Also, if you'd like to be added to the list for critiques, please send 2 images along with a note to the Weekly Art Tips group. Thanks for coming, and I'll see you guys next week.